Okay, class, I welcome you again to lecture 4. As just to recap a little bit, in lecture 3 we were talking about Ahmadu Ibrahim 2013 perspective on globalization and its impact in relation to Africa. We saw his reflections on advantages and disadvantages, and I think it's very important as a class to be able to make an analysis that globalization has advantages and has disadvantages. And if you read Ahmadu Ibrahim's work further, you will find that he even proposes how to mitigate the disadvantages. And I will leave that open for you to look at what he has recommended, but also to come with your own perspective, that every disadvantage of globalization that you identify, you should be able to have some perspective and reflections on how to mitigate them. Today's lecture is looking on the reactions to attempts to transform globalization. And in this lecture, we are looking at the work of Professor Ali Mazrui and his work, his famous book called The Africans. And in this particular lecture, we are making reference to that textbook, but also to a YouTube video that we have put in Moodle. You already have it in Moodle, so you can listen to both my lecture and to Professor Mazrui's lecture. And Professor Mazrui is basically looking at globalization as dependency and the Africa continent in decay. This is basic thesis, that globalization is creating dependency. Dependency on Africa to the global economy. But at the same time, it is not that sustainable. So sustainability is a key focus on Ali Mazrui's work, and basically he's saying that it leads to a continent in decay. So throughout, as we look at this course, we should be looking at these two themes: the theme of dependency and the theme of decay. And of course, Professor Mazrui starts, as you will see, he is riding on a very bad road in the city of Kampala, and he's saying that Western development, Western civilization has not been sustained. He gives an example of several countries, one of them Uganda, that the roads have not, they are in utter disrepair. They are in utter disrepair because of lack of financial capacity to maintain them. Roads may be obtained by a loan or may be obtained by a particular capital investment, but the question of operations, maintenance, and repair, the capacity is not there. Because a project may come and build a road, and then he continues and gives an example of a classroom in Ghana and again in Uganda, saying that when roads can decay, but what is most crucial institutions such as a school and such as a hospital, they are also decaying. The institutions to provide social services, to provide human development, and to provide development. Professor Mazrui gives a phrase, and he says, he met people, teachers in the school, and found out there was no, the building were in disrepair in Ghana. There were no textbooks, there was no stationery, there were no pens. And then he asked the teachers, why don't you write to the president about this? And they asked him, write to the president? With what? Because they didn't even have the paper and the pen to write on. So what does he say were the causes of decay? The causes of decay, he said, was basically poor governance, plundering, mismanagement of money, misadministration on the part of post-colonial governments in Africa. Some of them had a military background because of the culture of coup and counter-coup d'etats in the 70s, who had little to know about administration. So, whereas you had the colonial government, and if you like, you can go back with the dual mandate to promote development in Africa, but that was not sustained in post-colonial Africa. And he was really worrying about education because he says, if education fails, then it might be a failure of a civilization, a failure of Western civilization and its benefits. I'm sure it has also got its disbenefits, but its benefits to Africa, we may be witnessing an end. And so, globalization is to know. Globalization, colonialism, and interface of civilizations. And this is civilizations is very important to Ali Mazrui. He sees Africa as a triple heritage, receiving civilization from the Western Christian civilization and the Eastern Islamic civilization, but merging it with his own African indigenous civilization. So his focus on civilization is very important. That's part of globalization. It's part of globalization. It's only that the global has come to Africa. So he sees it as a decay. You can see it in the video. You can also access the text and read it. You can read further on Mazrui's work. He goes on to focus on dependence. And basically, he visits a sugar company in the Mauritius and in Uganda. And he says, first of all, the economy is dependent. The economy is dependent on the export of primary traditional commodity, traditional crops, such as tea and sugar. Not to be consumed as food. They are not basic foods. And he goes on to say, if the same land and the same capital and labor was used for the production of basic foods, staple foods like maize and beans, then there would not have been famine. But because the structure of the economy is dependent on the global economy, and the global economy is fulfilling its own taste for sugar, tea, and chocolates, then Africa is dependent, after being integrated into the cash economy, to produce for consumption outside the continent, while its own needs of staple, basic meals are not paid attention, and as a result, there is food shortage. You can extend the same analysis to cashew. You can extend the same analysis to cotton. You can extend the same analysis to sisal. All these are exports, traditional exports, crops that are taking land and are taking resources, while overall across Africa, there is still shortage for food resources. And to him, that is dependence. It's dependency in the structure of the economy within the agricultural sector, but it is also a source of decay in terms of famine and food shortage, nutrition, food poverty, and poverty. And as you know, where there is no food, there is no peace and security. Where there is no food, there is no manageable society. Where there is no food, there is no productivity. And where there is no food, there is no freedom of the mind in terms of the ability to be innovative and to apply innovation in the production. Basically, that is the form of the economy. And they are not focusing on basic food crops. Dependency. We are going to talk more of dependency as we go forward, and it applies also to infrastructure. You can see from Mazrui's analysis, the railroad is decaying, the roads are decaying, the schools are decaying, the buildings, the books, the materials for teaching are not there, and he sees that as the and he says that the dependency and the decay is partly being caused by integrating Africa into the cash economy, into the global cash economy. But without the wage labor to pay, without the cash, so Africa is integrated into the global cash economy without itself having the cash. And where you cannot have cash, you don't have wage labor. And as a result, Africa has got itself into a system of unemployment, youth unemployment, and general unemployment, because basically we are in the cash economy, and whereby in order to work you need cash. So we have the decay of unemployment again is a basis of our own creation. Corruption, the same applies to health services, operation and maintenance and supplies, and this leads to an overall failing economies, and because the economies are dependent on outsiders. Then Mazrui shifts his focus on dependency and decay to Tanzania. And he gives an example of a very big project that was big in the 80s and in the 70s of wheat, massive wheat production in the Basutu Plains, in Hana, in Manyara region in Tanzania. And basically what happened was, through International Development Corporation, Tanzania and Canada entered into an agreement. In his work, Ali Mazrui looks at the impact of international technological transfer. Transfer from one part of the world to transfer of another part of the world has impact on the social and ecological environment of the recipient countries. He gives an example that the Canadians brought heavy machinery, combine harvesters, and very heavy machinery, which worked very well in the plains of, in the state of Alberta in Canada, because there the soil was clay and it could withstand the impact of heavy machinery. But in Basutu, in Tanzania, the soil was volcanic, black volcanic soil. It tends to dry and crack. And therefore, those machines had a very profound ecological disaster on the soil. And it exacerbated erosion, it exacerbated the loss of nutrients, and within just about more than a decade of the production of the project there, the soils became, they could no longer support the production of wheat. But at the same time, it had an impact on the Barbary people who used to live in those prairies. They used to herd their cattle, they used to do primitive cultivation, mainly through slash and burning, but they also used to harvest some crops for food, and now they were displaced by the wheat farms. Literally, locked out of the farms, because the farms, as you know, they were titled, and therefore the concept of trespassing came in the situation which was not the case before, and it reduced the Barbaig of Tanzania into mere gatherers of wheat which was left off. And this case study to him again showed the impact of globalization. But in terms of international technological transfer, when technology is transferred from one part of the world to another part of the world, it is not without any impacts. Another example, not given by Mazrui, but that I am aware of, is the introduction of the power tiller. The power tiller has been introduced in many countries in Africa recently. And basically, what the power tiller did is it mechanized certain functions in farming, but it did not mechanize the others. It mechanized, for example, cultivation, but not weeding, planting, harvesting, and maybe it also mechanized a little bit transportation. Now, the division of labor of agricultural cycle in Africa is divided between men and women. Men are responsible for clearing the field and cultivating, and women responsible for planting, weeding, and harvesting. What the power tiller did, it mechanized the traditional division of labor that was assigned to men. And as a result, it increased the acreage of crop production. But at the same time, it did not mechanize the work that were done by women. Therefore, in increasing the workload of women, reducing the workload of men, but increasing the workload that was done by women. And as a result, this created a decay in terms of more work for women, less time for them to participate in governance of community affairs, less time for them to participate in continued and lifelong learning experiences about new variety of seeds, new variety of crops, and this contributes to gender inequality and different levels of development between men and women, including in elected political positions in governance. And therefore, this is how international technological transfer goes. Professor Mazrui gives another example of Siha Bakery. Siha Bakery is the bakery in the Tazara Junction in Dar es Salaam, which is now owned by Aza. And he said when the factory it came with a package of the Basotho wheat farms, that the wheat that was harvested in Basotho was taken to Dar es Salaam as a market to be made as bread. But that factory, the design was that of a factory that existed in Alberta, Canada. They didn't take care of the ventilation and the different temperature differences. The ventilation and the machinery was built for a cooler climate, and it was transferred to a hotter climate, which led to its very expensive breaking and operation and maintenance in a context where there was no cash in terms of foreign currency to buy and replace the spare parts. And as a result, it became ineffective to operate, and as a result, it was closed down. And what you see there is a new investment, if not just the premises being used for another thing. And here was Professor Mazrui's work that there is a dual economy. There is a dual economy of Africa, that there is bare subsistence on the other hand, operating line in line with mass production, which is coming as development. And as a result, it was not sustainable, leading to the examples that I've given you. In the Hanang Plains, they were fertile before, when there was, in the dual economy in Africa, bare subsistence. But when mass production came, the fragile soils, the shrubs, the trees, the hills were flattened, and there was an ecological disaster. There was a disaster. So he says, when you come to Africa, you slash a few shrubs, you cut down a few trees, you flatten a hill, you have an ecological disaster. Because the floods, when they came, the nature of rains, he says, in Africa is different from Canada. In Africa, they come as a very heavy downpour of torrential rains, where in Canada it is more evenly spread. And therefore, what you do in Canada, if you do it in Africa, because of the rain, the pattern of the rain and velocity, you create a disaster. And remember his thesis on dependency and decay in Africa. And as I said, volcanic transfer, technological transfer, volcanic soils in Africa, and they break up under the torrential rains, while in Canada the soil is organic and is more receptive. And these are miscalculations, he called them. There's been miscalculations, and it's again said the Siha factory. Tanzania, as a result of the project, imported a sophisticated electric bakery. And one decay that Al-Mazrui sees, and again you have to see how globalization is contributing to urban bias of development. The Siha bakery was built to satisfy the sweet tooth and taste of urban elites, while the Barbai, where the wheat was being produced, were reduced from subsistence to gatherers of the leftovers of wheat. The bread was built in Dar es Salaam, the bread factory. And again, this goes back to his analysis of the production of tea and the production of sugar for export, the elites of Europe, while there was food insecurity in the area where they were producing. Again, you can see the Siha factory project came with the same type of structure or impact or arrangement, whereby where the wheat was being produced, food scarcity was being created, an electric factory, sophisticated, was built in Dar es Salaam to satisfy the new test. And this is dependency. This is a dependency because even food habits are a result of dependence. Food habits are a result of dependence. And urban elite had created a new taste in the city, and as a result, the city lifestyle contributes to adoption of new values and new culture and way of living. One of them is the eating of bread. But then he points out the technology. The factory had a ventilation system that was brought from Canada. Its origin came from Canada, and it just could not bear the heat that where it was set in Dar es Salaam. And as a result, the spare part costs were high, and there was no foreign currency. And therefore, it meant that they had to close. But then another decay was that the factory was automated, and therefore it created very few jobs, and actually contributed to some of the jobs which were developing a bite for breakfast, whether it is bread, or whether it is donuts, or whether it is other products like cassava, which were being consumed for breakfast. The bread factory had contributed to take those jobs away. And he says this is the story of globalization. Very specific case studies. The plantation for export of traditional crops, infrastructure, both transport infrastructure and social infrastructure, such as roads, railways, and hospitals, but also he gave a very explicit example on a massive wheat production project that had both human and ecological disaster, and is attached to that project that factory that was built for the urban elites, and therefore the project creating new tests for the elites or serving the elites, while at the same time making the population where production is happening food insecure and contributing to urban development. But the technology itself was not appropriate, very high to service, and it was automated. It reduced jobs and created very few. And therefore, this is Ali Mazroui's conception on how globalization contributes to dependency after integration into the cash economy. However, being integrated into the cash economy without having the cash and without having the technology to service the cash, to service the technology as well, and how that contributes to servicing markets in other parts of the world instead of domestic markets and priorities, and that has also led to ecological disaster. The issues of impacts, specific impacts, we are going to look more in the remaining chapters. And however, the video of Ali Mazroui is there. I invite you to read. I invite you to listen to it and read some of his works and make your own analysis where you see dependency creating decay, and whether you agree with that analysis and what measures need to be taken in order to mitigate that. I hope you have enjoyed the lecture, and I look forward to seeing you in the forthcoming lectures.